I am so glad to be able to talk to Federico Faggin today. He's a physicist and inventor. He discovered or was an architect of the first microprocessor in 1971. And he had this amazing experience, and you can feel in his heart it's somebody who experienced something very exceptional, and it changed his perspective a little bit about science, consciousness. I think it's a well-rounded scientist that is opening to something extraordinary. He wrote this book called Irreducible: Consciousness, Life, Computers, and Human Nature. I know probably everybody asked you about this at the beginning, but can you tell us what happened very fast when you began to make that switch from looking for working with mathematics and physics and also then having this human experience that transform you, that make you understand panpsychism basically and what's being is all about?
All right. It was 1990 during the Christmas holidays that I have an extraordinary experience of consciousness. Up until that point, I was a physicalist or materialist. At that time, I was also very unhappy about my life, despite having essentially done everything right because I was rich and famous and I had a beautiful family. Everybody was happy and happy, I mean healthy, and I wasn't happy. And that was a problem of consciousness. And consciousness, I had just discovered that computers could not be conscious in the way in which we can understand because I was studying neuroscience, I was studying biology. At that time I was developing artificial neural networks, and so I wanted to understand how the brain works. And they say that the brain is just like a computer, has electrical signals and biochemical signals, and that consciousness comes out of those signals. How is that possible? I don't recognize the taste of chocolate by, looking at the electrical signals in my brain. I recognize chocolate by its taste, by the sensation that I have in my consciousness. That's what consciousness does. Consciousness is the one that allows us to know by sensations and feelings. As soon as we remember about ourselves, we were conscious. So we have always been conscious. It just is impossible to think that you're not conscious. Of course, if you think about it, when you sleep and you have a dreamless sleep, then you are unconscious, because you may wake up 3 hours later, and it doesn't look like any time passed. We don't realize when the scientists tell us that, oh, consciousness is in the brain because the brain operates like a computer and is conscious. And we don't think twice because it's so natural for us to be that way. As a physicist, I want to understand how things work. Somehow I need to explain how electrical signals can transform themselves into sensations and feelings. How can I do that? There is nothing in physics that tells you how to do that. I wanted to understand. And it was in that climate of wanting to know, also because I was not happy, and happiness or unhappiness is a problem of consciousness. It's not a problem of electrical signals. So I had an experience that changed my perception of who I am and the perception of the world. And that experience, essentially, one night I woke up, I was thirsty, went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and then I went back to bed. Just as I was trying to, go back to sleep, at one point my chest, a beam of energy, but it was a physical energy. It was not an imagination. It was physical energy, and it was a white scintillating light came out of my chest, and it was love. And it was love that was so powerful, and so, so incredible, because how can I be the source of this energy? It was, 10,000, 100 times more powerful than any love that I've ever felt. But my consciousness was in this beam of energy. So I was that. You see, so how can I be that on top of it? So, and then this light expands, this scintillating light expands, and together with love, there was peace and joy. And the peace was very, for me, it was an unusual because I felt like home. This is me. And of course, in that light that was outside of me, that light was also conscious. So it was me outside of me. Again, how is that possible? My body was vibrating, almost like it was resonating with this scintillating light. And my thought at one point, wow, this is the stuff of which everything is made. This is this is
Ultimate
this is the
reality.
energy, call it whatever you want,
Right.
that made everything. And I am that. So I was both the observer and the observed. And that is also mind-boggling. I've always felt separate from the world and separate from others. How can I be the world? And so that perspective was so powerful that it changed my life because it was so true. It was me. How can my consciousness be outside of the body? And I never perceived consciousness beside of, I was always perceiving myself in my head, not so much in my body, but mostly in my head, the top of my head, in fact. That is the turning point for me. And 35 years ago. And then for 20 years, I studied consciousness. I wanted to understand what happens. How can I explain? How can I explain this? As a physicist, I'm always interested in explaining things.
Yeah.
And and you will see at the
Oh,
end that I cannot explain consciousness and free
yes.
will. I have to start with them. But
Yes.
if I start there, I can explain the rest. The starting point of this theory is a postulate which I created, is the postulate I call the postulate of being. The postulate says one, which is the totality of what exists, is dynamic, holistic, and wants to know itself. Now, dynamic means it's never the same instant after instant. Holistic means everything is interconnected. It's not made of separable parts. One is one, indivisible. And if I stop here, I have described the universe described by quantum physics. Quantum physics says that the universe is dynamic and holistic. But then they say that consciousness and free will comes out when there is a brain, and that's wrong. And they don't even say, why do you have a brain or whatever, right? It's just a random. But I say, no, since consciousness and free will cannot be explained with anything that doesn't have it, they must be part of one from the very beginning. But then what do? Well, they are the ways in which one knows itself. Consciousness is what allows you to experience and to know by having an experience. That's it. That's all that's all you have to say. And you know what I'm saying because you are doing the same thing. You know that without consciousness, you will be sleeping. And if you sleep, you don't know anything, and somebody may beat you up. And if you don't wake up because there is nothing to wake up to, you may die or you may act like a zombie. Zombie meaning you're not conscious and nothing happens. I mean, that's machines are like that. We attribute consciousness to a machine because they act like us. But that's a misattribution. That's wrong. There is no consciousness there because there is no field that controls the machine. There is
Right.
just a bits that we have created. We have created those bits with our consciousness.
You talk about free will, you talk about consciousness. Where's love? Is it part of free will or is
That feeling was so much more powerful than the deepest love I had before in my life. And the joy and the peace was, I never felt love with peace. And peace was very powerful because I realized at that point that I was always thinking what I was going to do next. My mind was always running ahead of the present. And now I know that the only way that you can find peace is in the present moment by being who you are right now in this place where you are. Consciousness, then, where is it? Is it in the body? It cannot be a phenomenon of the body. It took me 20 years to realize that by studying consciousness deeply, both within myself, studying books and so on. And I had many other extraordinary experiences of consciousness. And so at the end, I arrive at the conclusion that consciousness must be fundamental, must exist from the beginning because you cannot explain it based on matter that doesn't have any consciousness or any free will. So free will and consciousness must be what allow a being to be self-conscious and be able to direct its own experience. I had the experience of being separable from the world. So already that experience is not the experience of classical physics. Classical physics says that everything is separate from everything else. But quantum physics say no, everything is interconnected. And the entanglement that is a property of quantum fields, of the states of quantum fields, is actually a finding that took about 80 years to physicists to accept that the deeper reality has this property called entanglement. This means that when two particles, for example, interact, they can create states in common that they retain. They retain that state that they have created even when they're separated. When a particle interacts with another particle, it will manifest that portion of the state, and instantly, even if that particle is 200 light years away, instantly, some of those two properties is the same that was at the very beginning. And this is being verified. Einstein said in 1935, says, this is impossible.
But it's
You know,
faster than the speed of
this
light,
is
right?
something is wrong with quantum physics.
Yeah, yeah.
And, and for 50 years, nobody could do anything because, first of all, people believed that Einstein was right, and so they were not too concerned about it. There is this property which nobody understands why it can be, because it would imply that information moves faster than the speed of light, which is impossible. And in fact, you cannot move information faster than the speed of light to communicate. So this is not possible. And yet there is these properties which are probabilistic. Because they are probabilistic, that's why you cannot communicate. But inside the field, there is an instant communication when one particle is taking on this state because it interacts with an instrument or with something else. The other particle instantly has to have the complementary property that was connected. Nobody understands.
So that's what Einstein called the spooky action at distance. And he went against all these theory that it goes faster than the speed of light. So you could say that it's multidimensional. Some aspect of reality cannot go faster than the speed of light, and some aspect of the field information can go faster than the speed instantly.
Well, the fact is that the information that cannot go faster than the speed of light is the classical information, or there are the bits,
Right.
is the matter, the information carried by matter, because information is a intellectual abstraction.
Right.
We are calling information a probability
Right.
that something might happen in a sequence of events. The actual understanding came about 4 or 5 years ago. The quantum fields are the ones that are conscious and have free will. So the quantum fields are not in space and time. They exist in a deeper reality, and they control the body. The body is like a drone that is connected to the field. The two communicate like you communicate to a drone to make the drone do what you want. Same way, who we are not in the body. We think we are in the body because we have been told that by scientism, and also it is the logical thing to say. But in fact, you cannot explain that. And there are many extraordinary experiences of consciousness, like the near-death experiences, for example, that show that people can be conscious even when the body is clinically dead. Of course, it is resuscitated, but only in the last 100 years, actually, the last probably 70 years, people report experiences that are extraordinary. 1 million people in the world that have had near-death experiences. So those are saying very clearly, when you find yourself over your body in the ceiling of the operating room, and you look down and you see your body being operated, well, how can anybody claim that your consciousness is in the body when you are in the ceiling looking down at your body? Once you are in that the other dimension, you look at the body, it's like you would look at a dead drone, in our life. So
So the consciousness is in the field. Do we separate like the Higgs field and all the different quantum fields? How do we define this field exactly? All the field together?
Well, these fields are interconnected. So interconnected in a deeper way from the inside. What is it that interconnects this field from within? What happens with quantum physics? When particles interact, they create states which are in common. What is common is much deeper than just what is in common between you and I. If we look at just the physical body, what we have in common is not connected. What I have in common is not connected with what you have in common within your body physically. But in the quantum, that connection is so deep that if something happens immediately in me, it would happen immediately in you if we were fields. And so this type of connection doesn't occur in classical physics. And by the way, classical physics is the physics of macroscopic bodies made of large numbers of atoms and molecules, which are disorderly. They're not coherent with each other. So quantum properties disappear in such bodies because of their incoherence. Because quantumness is about coherence. So you can have, for example, a macroscopic quantum system. Just laser light is a macroscopic quantum system that has many photons, but the photons are all in phase. And this can only happen with quantum systems. That's why a beam of laser light, it doesn't diverge much. You can illuminate a few meter a beam to the moon. So it's almost straight like a line. Coherence is what makes quantum physics completely different.
They used to say actually that quantum biology macroscopically is not possible because our body is too wet and too hot, and originally that they're not going to find quantum effect, and we find them everywhere now, in the smell, in the eyes. So this idea was not correct, that we are too wet and too warm. It's mainly about coherence.
We are made of cells, which are quantum and classical. They obey quantum physics. They do not obey classical physics. And this is something molecular biology are beginning to realize, that we study cells, life, first by killing it. and then by assuming that it is a classical system. We have studied biochemistry, essentially the biochemistry of life. But the biochemistry of life can only explain so much. But there is much more inside a cell, especially the overall organization of the cell. Somehow there is an orchestration within a cell, which is unbelievable. And nobody understands how it can even, what's going on. The only physicist that have made strides here has been an Italian physicist, Emilio del Giudice, that has found that the properties of water are foundational, and they are very unique. They are quantum properties that create domains of coherence. Within that domain of coherence, if molecules can actually find themselves and interact and combine. There is a new branch of biology now called quantum biology, which has been ostracized until recently, probably 3 or 4 years ago, but even now they're still looked with some suspicion. But those are the ones that will solve the problem of understanding life as a quantum phenomenon, not as a classical phenomenon. It's actually quantum and classical phenomenon. Both
Yeah, so
mixed.
do we have to always oppose classical physics and quantum, or can we make a physics that englobes both aspects?
There is no sharp boundary between quantum and classical. Because it depends on the coherence, and this quantum coherence can go from no coherence at all to perfect coherence, and then you have a perfectly, you have super fluidity, superconductors, things that you cannot have in classical physics. You can only do that if you have this 100% or very high level of coherence. The true physics, the more fundamental physics, is quantum physics. Is classical physics. There is an approximation, if you want, is a reduction of the properties that you find in quantum physics. So the foundation of physics is quantum, but then you have also physics where the quantum effects cancel out and those behave classically. And those are predictable. The classical phenomena are predictable. Quantum phenomena are not predictable. There is free will. That's the other point. So the new theory that I developed together with a professor of quantum information, which is a world authority in quantum information, is in Italian, Giacomo Mauro D'Ariano. We have developed a theory that says that if you start with consciousness and free will, you can explain why quantum physics has the properties, the extraordinary properties that it has that nobody has ever understood. Number one, the quantum state of a field has exactly the same properties of your conscious experience. It's almost like the universe experiencing itself is behaving with properties which now we discover, like the quantum state cannot be reproduced, cannot be copied. But you can copy the state of a computer, which is made of bits, the bits in memory. You can copy the data and program of a computer as many times as you want, and you can do that perfectly. You cannot do that with the quantum state of a field. At the most, if you make a measurement, you can get one classical bit per quantum bit. And a quantum bit is an infinity of state. And the quantum bits are entangled with each other, which is a property that the classical bits don't have. Basically, you can get very little information by measurement, or even if the field will manifest itself, it will give you very little information compared to a classical system. And that's a completely different way of understanding. So we are saying that a conscious experience requires that the field, the quantum state, has these properties, which is what we know. So then if the field is conscious, well, then the collapse of the wave function then can be explained as a free will decision of the field, that the field will manifest exactly the state that you measure. Remember that in quantum physics, a particle is not an object. Right. A particle is a state of a field. It cannot be separated from the field. Just like a wave of the sea is inseparable from the sea. Yeah. So this is a very important difference. In fact, no particle moves in space and time. Only when you make the measurement, the particles will manifest with that particular property. They assume the property when you measure them. And they're not moving in space and time. They're states of the field. They become excited in the interaction between the field and the instrument that measures the state of the field.
You cannot reproduce a field. It has its own consciousness and free will. So every moment is different. It's a pure creativity from the field.
Yeah, but a decision of free will is a true creation. The collapse of the wave function has exactly those properties. It's a pure randomness. Pure randomness means not algorithmic. There is no. It's not a. You cannot get this state by any law. So in the present, you create a memory trail of your experience. So now the past. There is no past in time. There is always that present, and there is a memory that grows. If your consciousness expands, it can stay in the present and have access to entire memory as the memory grows. Not only that, but you bring into the present all that memory. You see, by having the consciousness is like you broaden the beam of your ability to see. To experience what, and then you're staying in the present as the memory of your experience is increasing. So the present is growing. The present is inflating, so to speak. Okay. And in that same present, you may be able to make predictions as to what you may experience in the future, but the future hasn't happened yet. So you can also in the present have a projection into the future. If you can do a simulation of what might happen in the future faster than real time, within that present, you can actually get an experience of potentially what might happen in the future. So the actual experience is only in the present. But it is a present that expands. But that's not what we think of time when we are incarnated, when we are, in a body. This is for fields that interact with each other without a body. When we interact with the body, well, then we have to deal with with the physical body that behaves with its own rules, and then the space and time is largely a construction of the consciousness, our consciousness, as is trying to explain how this physical world works without thinking that there is a deeper reality. And now that we understand that, then we can explain it.
Right. You cannot shut down from your consciousness. You cannot really shut down from your free will, but you can shut down and not perceive love and live in duality, live in some kind of classical physics when you cannot shut yourself down from consciousness or free will. And probably you can shut you down from your will to know yourself.
In a sense, you can shut down yourself from consciousness and free will by basically going along with the body. So your consciousness simply goes along with the body. The body has been trained by the consciousness. The consciousness acts with the body. Your consciousness acts with the body as if your body was a artificial intelligence system that you train. You train it, you are the supervisor of this system. And if you have trained the body to do certain things, and then you let the body make decisions for you, and you go along with it as a conscious being, it's still your free will, but you're not exercising the free will to go against the machines that you have trained that wants you to shoot or to do something wrong, because you have not understood what's going on. Essentially, you have gone with whatever instinct whatever. Again, can we explain that? Yes, because we are here to provide an experience, a learning experience, to the vaster self that we are, which is the field. When we are embodied, a very small portion of this vaster field, of this vaster consciousness, becomes identified with the body, believes to be the body, and then it is trained actually early on in the first year of life by this satiety, by this vaster consciousness of the field, to express the aspects of itself that this satiety wants to understand. This conditioning of the body by the consciousness of the field early on, so that the body will act representing the aspect of the vaster self, the satiety wants to see about herself. Then we are behaving in ways that allows the vaster self to understand the issues that she wants to understand.
The field behind consciousness, you have this intention of knowing itself. He knows and he wants to know more, expand reality, and then do any sense of what he's trying to know.
The most important thing to know for the larger self, what does it want?
Right.
And there is a duality there. There is two possible ways. Is your life in the service of yourself, or is your life in the service of all, meaning the others, but also yourself? And this is the fundamental issue that any soul must come to a decision. Do I want to work for myself? Do I want to work for everybody? We have to understand it. And to understand it, the ego is not the one that understands. The ego is simply serving the vaster self, because it is a part of that vaster self that wants to know and wants to see how you respond to different situations. Do you respond with that intention or with a different intention? Yeah. With one of those two. Absolutely. That's binary. But of course, there are many degrees. So finding that is one of the, in my opinion, that's an opinion. I mean, this is not a theorem, but certainly in my life, I can see how many layers of this self-deception there were in my own life before accepting, wow, yeah, now I got it. When I do that, by the way, it's not my ego that does that. It's the vaster self that is informing the ego, because the ego is now open to work with the vaster self.
Right. And if we come back into more healing, can we say that one of the things the healer, the therapist is doing is bringing more coherence, bringing people more to know themselves and to find their intention? When we have two people touching each other with manual therapy, I'm an osteopath. When you touch somebody, do we have this connection, like between the field, the deep interiority of the field touching itself and knowing itself more?
In our life, we have many examples of what it means to truly understand ourselves. Is what feels like a resonance between a person and another person. This sort of, this deeper understanding that brings a portion of this state, my state and the state of the person, that is really a response. This happens, for example, between men and wife, or men and a person with which one has a deeper intimate relationship, not necessarily sexual, but just an intimate understanding of each other. When that happens, we know deep down, we know that we got it, that we both have understood that stuff. Unfortunately, this society tends to tear us apart because, first of all, from the very beginning of our life, we are taught to compete. For example, in our modern society, competition rather than cooperation is the rule. And in fact, you're supposed to compete. Something wrong with you if you don't compete. And that is exactly the opposite of what comes out by this theory. This theory, every field is a part whole of one, contains the whole, the potentiality of the whole. Exactly like each cell of our body contains the genome of the egg that created the entire organism. So we are holographic, meaning that the whole is inside the part. It appears crazy, but that's possible because reality is fractal, meaning that a similar pattern is repeated at different scale. Therefore, you can have this characteristic. Holography goes together with fractality. The same basic rules repeat at different scales. We see it, for example, that, atoms look like a solar system a little bit, but not quite. It's not the same, but it's similar. That's also how one can know itself. It could not know itself if everything was different. It would be impossible. And also why there are laws of physics, because the laws of physics are simply the symbolic reflection of the deeper laws, which are the semantic laws of the nature of one. But every time that it repeats, it's not the same, exactly the same. It's a little different. And so that's that's how I see it. But, of course, this is premature because most people think that we're bodies. Scientism is telling you that we are machines. And the only way to really understand that, is to experience that you're not a machine. So you cannot get it intellectually. It has to be a lived experience. We know because we experience. And that's what consciousness does. But if consciousness is supposed to be an epiphenomenon of the brain, who cares? And intuition, forget about intuition, who cares? I mean, this is the stuff that we're told today. And if you feel bad, forget it, just don't pay attention. By not paying attention, I became very unhappy with my life, despite having done everything right. I thought that I was, I should have been very happy, and I was miserable. How is that possible? And it's only because by being CEO of already of a couple of companies, by the time I realized this, I had understood that I'm responsible for what happens in my life. Most people blame everybody else other than themselves about what happens in their lives. I did not. I understood because as CEO, when you screw up, you did it. So if you don't accept that, you cannot grow, by the way.
Yeah.
So, and you cannot be a good CEO. But I wanted to know. And it was that wanting to know, just to know, that brought this experience that awakened me to my real nature. So this anybody can do. I did not meditate. I did not do anything because I didn't care about that stuff. I wanted to do what I thought was the right thing to do, which was what I was passionate about, making computers, better computers that can learn, all this kind of stuff. But that was not enough, because in doing so, I did not pay attention to myself, and I betray myself.
Even though you are inside your body as, more Newtonian, and you are quantum, and you are expanded in all these different dimensions, there's this dialogue. You could see like you are happy and you have a response. So the different part of you, between the small you and the bigger one, dialogue, and there's a response to help you come back into coherence. with who you already are.
Mm-hmm.
The question here is like, the field let you go against his intention in order for you to come back into coherence, because you have the free will to separate and not trying to know yourself.
That's why we, as fields, invented long ago to have experiences in worlds like this using an instrument, which is the body, in order to be able to simulate to go against ourselves, because we cannot go against ourselves. The field cannot go against itself,
Right.
but the body can go against you, and you as a
Right.
body can go against me. But that is like a simulation of a computer. Then, we are characters in a computer. So who cares? Once we awake to who we are, we look at each other and say, that was a great thing. That was a great fight.
It's only the drone. It's
But
only the drone that he tells themselves, but the
of
consciousness.
course, yeah.
You said sometime that the moment the field knows itself, it splits in another part.
The field can actually generate another field. Just like one generated fields, what Leibniz called monads, and other people call conscious as units. But one creates parts all. I mean, that's why there is life is really starts with one. It doesn't start with cells. It starts with creating fields, and then the fields now create symbols that have the properties of fields. You see, but you start with fields. You don't start with matter to get
Right.
fields.
I'm not sure why I hear that. Like, I don't know myself and I'm trying to know myself and I'll never reach it.
Let's explore what it means to know yourself. Now, if one is holistic, not made of separable parts, to know itself, it needs to know all possible aspects of itself in all possible ways. And in fact, if you think even more deeply, when one knows itself in a new way for the first time, it brings into existence a part whole of itself. That's what it means. When one knows itself for the first time in a certain direction, it creates a monad, because it saw itself in that first direction all the way. But only that portion that it saw in that moment, that instant, and now that portion that is not separate from the rest of it must know itself in connection with the self and the others. And so to know yourself, you need to know the others. That's why cooperation is the game here. It's not competition. If you compete, you don't want the other. You want to get something from the other. You don't want to cooperate. You want to know. There is no end to this. The more one knows about itself, the more he has to know, because the more connection he has made, new connections that now begets new connection with everything else, you see? And that makes sense. There is no reason why the universe should stop. This whole idea of entropy and so on is based on classical physics. It's not based on quantum physics.
Right.
And not understanding that there is a deeper reality of what exists in space and time. What exists in space and time is a tiny part of what exists in this deeper reality. That's why we can do quantum computation. Quantum computation cannot be done in space and time. It must be done in another reality. And physicists don't know where that reality is. But obviously, it cannot be just mathematics. Mathematics doesn't do its own computation. You need some physical thing to do the computation. So where is that thing done? Not in space and time. And so they have this many world interpretation of Everett, for example, which is the way they think that there are an infinity of universes where you do this stuff. I don't believe that.
Yes. So it's a place when you can have entanglement, superposition. You can be at two states.
Well, entanglement is the property that is used in order to have computation that goes faster than the speed of light. You use exactly entanglement. If you did not have entanglement, you couldn't go faster than the speed of light. The problem of consciousness is exactly a problem that for 100 years, physicists believed that it's not a problem. Or if it was a problem, it could not be explained by physics. But in fact, it was not something that made any sense. And only in the last 30 years, there was this progress that really taken seriously the fact that we are conscious and the fact that we cannot explain it with any science that we know.
What a beautiful combination of reality, subjectivity, objectivity, science, spirituality. It's absolutely so touching. So for me, it's an amazing framework, and I hope I can use it in my practice.
But this is the book,
Yes, reducible. Perfect. I'll put a picture
reducible.
on side. Blessings, blessing.
My
Well,
pleasure.
you do an amazing work. I absolutely resonate so deeply with it. It's just amazing. Thank you so much.